There's a decision most Americans approaching retirement will make almost automatically, without running the numbers, without considering alternatives, without realizing that this single choice, more than almost any other, will determine how much their retirement actually buys them. The decision is where to live, and the typical pattern is to not actually decide at all. You just stay where you already are. The house you bought 30 years ago, the state you've lived in for decades, the city you're familiar with. It feels like the obvious choice. It feels like continuity. It feels like home. But that default decision, made without examination, can cost the average American retiree $300,000, 20 years of financial comfort, and sometimes the difference between a retirement that feels expansive and one that feels constricted. Let me show you the blueprint. Because the honest truth is that the same $800,000 in retirement savings buys dramatically different lives depending on where you spend them. And almost nobody runs the comparison before it's too late to change course. Let me start with the specific math, because the scale of this is much larger than most Americans realize. Consider two fictional couples, both 62 years old, both with exactly $800,000 saved for retirement, both receiving the same combined Social Security benefits of about $45,000 a year. Their financial situations on paper are identical. Couple A lives in a suburb of San Francisco, in a modest 3-bedroom home they've owned for 28 years. Their home is worth $1.2 million, fully paid off. Their property taxes alone run about $15,000 a year. Groceries for two cost them about $1,000 a month. Utilities, including water, power, and garbage, run another $400. Their supplemental Medicare and health costs approach $500 a month. Gas, car insurance, basic household expenses, modest dining out, occasional travel. When they add it all up, honestly, they're spending around $90,000 to $100,000 a year to maintain their current lifestyle. With Social Security covering $45,000, they need to withdraw about $50,000 to $55,000 from savings each year. At a 4% withdrawal rate, their $800,000 only safely supports about $32,000 in annual withdrawals. They're withdrawing nearly twice that. Their money will run out in about 15 to 17 years, depending on market returns. They'll be 77 or 78 years old when the portfolio is depleted. And they haven't taken a single major trip or done anything extravagant. This is just the cost of existing in their current location. Couple B lives in a suburb of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a similar 3-bedroom home they bought 5 years ago after selling their previous house. Their home here costs $300,000 and is fully paid off. Their property taxes run about $2,000 a year, literally 7 times less than Couple A's property taxes alone. Groceries cost around $700 a month in this lower-cost region. Utilities run about $250. Supplemental Medicare and health costs are similar because Medicare itself is federal, but everything else is dramatically cheaper. Tennessee has no state income tax. Their total annual spending, maintaining a comparable lifestyle, is about $55,000 to $60,000. With Social Security covering $45,000, Couple B needs to withdraw only $10,000 to $15,000 from savings each year. That's well below the safe withdrawal rate. Their portfolio continues growing throughout their retirement. They can afford to travel. They can help their grandchildren with college. They can handle an unexpected medical emergency without panic. They'll likely leave a meaningful inheritance behind. And their quality of life by most measurable standards is arguably better than couple A's. Less traffic, more space, friendlier neighbors, a slower pace, closer access to nature. The difference between these two retirements is not intelligence, not discipline, not even financial preparation. It's geography. Exactly the same $800,000 in savings produces two completely different retirement experiences because the dollars purchase different amounts of life in different places. Now, I chose these two locations deliberately because they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, but the pattern holds across many pairs of American locations. A retirement in Austin costs roughly 40% more than the same retirement in San Antonio. A retirement in New Jersey costs roughly 60% more than the same retirement in rural Pennsylvania. A retirement in Denver costs roughly 50% more than the same retirement in Colorado Springs just down the road. The specific numbers vary, but the principle is consistent. Geography is one of the largest single variables in retirement financial math, and most Americans give it almost no deliberate thought. There's a reason for this. The places where Americans typically accumulate their wealth during their working years, major metropolitan areas with strong job markets, good schools, and high salaries, are usually not the places that optimize for retirement spending power. The high cost of living that came with the high salary made sense when you were earning that salary. It often makes much less sense when you're no longer earning, and your accumulated savings need to stretch across decades. But most people never confront this mismatch. They assume continuity is the default. They never ask the question, does the location that served my working years also serve my retirement? And for many, the honest answer, if they were to run the numbers, would be no. This is where most people get it wrong. They think retirement is primarily a saving and investment problem. It's partly that, but it's also, equally importantly, a spending problem. And where you live determines how much your spending costs you, which determines how long your savings last, which determines the quality and shape of your retirement. You don't need more money, you need a better plan. And the plan for the geography of retirement has to be examined explicitly, not assumed, not defaulted to, not left to inertia. Examined, discussed, and chosen with full awareness of what each option actually costs. Let me walk you through the 5 dimensions that actually matter when you're thinking about retirement geography. Because the decision is more layered than most people realize, and each dimension produces different trade-offs that are worth examining honestly. Dimension 1 is cost of living. This is the dimension most Americans think about first, and it's the most obvious financial factor. Housing, groceries, utilities, transportation, healthcare, everyday expenses. The differences between locations can be staggering. A retiree in a low-cost area might spend $4,000 a month comfortably. The same retiree maintaining an equivalent lifestyle in a high-cost area might spend $8,000 or more. Doubled over 25 years of retirement. That difference alone can mean $1.5 million of required additional savings. Nobody would accept a doubling of their expenses voluntarily in any other context. but they accept it through geographic inertia because they never did the comparison. The tools for running this comparison are now freely available online. Cost of living calculators from Numbeo, Bankrate, and Smart Asset let you plug in your current city and compare dozens of others. I'd encourage every American over 40 to spend one quiet Saturday morning running your current location against 5 or 6 others, a mix of places you could see yourself living. The results will probably surprise you. Dimension 2 is state and local tax treatment. This one is massively under-discussed. State income tax, property tax, sales tax, and estate tax vary enormously across the United States, and the differences can dramatically affect your retirement spending power. Some states have no state income tax at all. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Nevada, Washington, Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska. Other states tax retirement income heavily, with California, New York, New Jersey, and some northeastern states being particularly expensive. The difference for a couple withdrawing $70,000 a year from retirement accounts can be $8,000 to $10,000 a year in state income tax, or zero. Over a 25-year retirement, that's a $200,000 to $250,000 difference for doing nothing different except living in a different state. Property taxes matter similarly. New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut have some of the highest property tax rates in the country. Hawaii, Alabama, and Colorado have some of the lowest. On a home worth $300,000, that difference can be $5,000 to $7,000 a year, every single year, for as long as you own the home. But tax treatment isn't as simple as move to a no-income tax state and you win. Many of those states have higher sales taxes, higher property taxes in certain areas, fewer services, or lower quality infrastructure. The honest comparison requires looking at the total tax burden for your specific situation, your income level, your home value, your spending patterns, rather than just cherry-picking one line item. But the comparison is worth doing carefully, because the difference is real, and it compounds over decades. Dimension 3 is healthcare access and quality. This is increasingly important as retirees age. Some areas have excellent medical infrastructure, major academic medical centers, specialists in every subspecialty, excellent hospitals within 30 minutes. Other areas, especially many rural regions that are otherwise attractive for cost of living, have medical access problems. The nearest hospital might be 45 minutes away. Specialist care might require a 3-hour drive. The rural quality of life benefits can quickly reverse if you develop a condition that requires ongoing specialized treatment. For retirees in their 60s, this may feel distant. Most 62-year-olds feel healthy and don't imagine themselves needing complex medical care anytime soon. But retirement typically lasts 25 to 35 years, and the probability of needing good medical care during that span is essentially 100%. The couple who moved to a beautiful, low-cost rural area at 64 might love the first decade. They might hate the decade after that when one of them develops a chronic condition requiring regular specialist visits that now involve multi-hour drives. The honest trade-off here is that the lowest cost retirement destinations often have weaker medical infrastructure, while the best medical infrastructure often comes at a higher cost of living. Many American retirees split the difference by choosing mid-sized cities with regional medical centers. Places like Asheville, North Carolina, or Greenville, South Carolina, or smaller Texas cities, which offer both reasonable cost and reasonable healthcare access. Dimension 4 is climate and lifestyle fit. This is harder to quantify, but genuinely matters. Some Americans thrive in cold northern winters. Others find them increasingly miserable as they age. Some love the dry heat of Arizona or New Mexico. Others find extreme heat dangerous for their health. Some need access to ocean, mountains, or forests to feel alive. Others prefer flat landscapes and open sky. None of these preferences are wrong, but they matter for retirement because you'll be living in that climate every day, likely for decades, and the psychological weight of a bad climate fit accumulates over time. Dimension 5 is proximity to family. And this is usually the dimension that determines people's actual decisions, even when they claim they're making the decision financially. The desire to be near adult children and grandchildren is powerful, and for many retirees, it outweighs most other considerations. That's a legitimate choice, but it should be an examined choice, not a default one. If you fix this, everything changes. You don't need more money, you need a better plan. And the plan for geography requires weighing all 5 of these dimensions explicitly, not just letting one of them dominate the decision without consideration of the others. Let me address the most common reason Americans don't relocate in retirement, even when the financial case for doing so is overwhelming. Because this reason is real, legitimate, and deserves direct engagement rather than dismissal. The reason is family, specifically adult children and grandchildren. When a 62-year-old couple considers whether to leave their high-cost home and move somewhere more affordable, the conversation almost always runs into the same reality. Their daughter lives 40 minutes away. Their son and his family live in the next town over. Their 3 grandchildren are 6, 8, and 11, and they babysit every Wednesday afternoon. The grandchildren come over for Sunday dinners. They show up at school plays and baseball games. They're woven into the daily fabric of their extended family's life. Moving 1,500 miles away to save $2,000 a month on expenses would disrupt all of that. It would reduce them from present grandparents to video call grandparents. It would mean flying in for holidays instead of being the reliable backbone of weekly family life. And for most people, no amount of financial optimization makes that trade worth it. I want to say clearly, this is a legitimate choice. The relationships with adult children and grandchildren are real, irreplaceable, and genuinely valuable in ways that exceed the financial math. If staying near family is what you want, that's a perfectly defensible decision. But even within that constraint, there are often much better geographic choices than people realize. Let me explain. Even if you want to stay near family, you probably don't have to stay in your current specific city or neighborhood. If your family lives in expensive suburbs of Boston, there are affordable suburbs of Boston or adjacent small towns within a 30-minute drive that cost significantly less. If your family is in the New York metropolitan area, there are parts of Pennsylvania, Connecticut, or New Jersey that are dramatically cheaper while still allowing regular family contact. If your family is in California, there might be neighboring regions in Nevada or Arizona that are hours away but still allow for frequent visits. The relocation question isn't always, should I move 1,500 miles? Sometimes it's, should I move 30 miles to a lower cost area that still keeps me close to the people I love? I've seen this pattern work beautifully many times. A couple in an expensive city suburb near their adult children sells their home, buys a much less expensive home an hour away in a smaller town with good roads and transportation. They visit their family almost as often as before, perhaps weekly instead of twice a week. Their expenses drop by 40%. Their savings last 20 years longer. They're still the present grandparents they wanted to be. They just stretched the geography slightly, and it changed the financial picture completely. Another pattern that works is the seasonal split. Some retirees spend part of the year near family and part of the year somewhere with a dramatically lower cost of living. They might have a small paid-off home near their children for 6 or 8 months of the year and rent or own a modest place in Florida, Arizona, or North Carolina for the cold months. The annual cost of this arrangement is often substantially less than staying year-round in a high-cost area, and it gives both closeness to family and access to different environments and weather. Now let me address the deeper question about family proximity because it's worth examining honestly. Many retirees overestimate how much their adult children actually want them geographically close. This isn't about love. Adult children love their parents. But the reality of adult life is that children are often consumed with their own careers, relationships, and young children. They're tired. Their weekends are busy. They might see their parents once a week or twice a month, not every other day. The retiree who stays in an expensive area specifically to be available daily might discover their adult children can only actually receive them weekly, in which case, living slightly farther away wouldn't meaningfully change the relationship. I'd encourage anyone making the geography of retirement decision to have honest conversations with their adult children about what they actually want and need. Not defensive conversations, real ones. If we moved 2 hours away to a more affordable area, how would that affect our relationship? Would you visit us there? Would we come to you for holidays and special events? Would we still be close? Many adult children, asked directly, will share that they'd rather have less stressed parents in a somewhat more distant location than financially strained parents nearby. And they'd rather their parents have a strong financial foundation for the long future than watch that foundation deplete year by year. There's another dimension to this. Sometimes retirees stay near family because they want to be helpers, babysitters, support structures, people their adult children can count on. That's a genuine role and a valuable one. But consider this honestly. Would you rather be a helpful grandparent for 15 years before your money runs out, or a helpful grandparent for 30 years from a location that sustains your finances? Sometimes the most loving long-term thing you can do for your family is position yourself to be present and capable for decades, rather than present and stressed for 1 decade. If you fix this, everything changes. You don't need more money. You need a better plan. And the plan, when family proximity is a priority, requires creativity rather than defaulting to your current specific location. There are almost always options that honor both the financial reality and the family relationships if you look for them. Let me now walk you through the specific geographic options that tend to work best for retired Americans, based on the research and the patterns I've observed. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it'll give you a framework for thinking about what might fit your situation. The first category I'll call the mid-sized Southeast. This includes places like Greenville, South Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, Chattanooga and Knoxville, Tennessee, Huntsville, Alabama, Savannah, Georgia, parts of northern Florida outside the tourist corridors. These locations share several characteristics that work well for retirement. Cost of living roughly 15 to 30% below the national average. Reasonable healthcare infrastructure because they're large enough to have real hospitals and specialists. Mild winters, though summers can be hot and humid. Generally friendly culture. Growing enough to have modern amenities but not so large that traffic and real estate prices have become oppressive. And in most cases, favorable tax treatment for retirees, especially in Tennessee and Florida, which have no state income tax. The trade-offs are that some of these places have been discovered in recent years and become more expensive than they used to be. Some have cultural fit issues for retirees coming from politically different regions of the country. And the summer heat can be genuinely difficult for people used to northern climates. The second category is what I'll call the affordable Southwest. Places like Tucson, Arizona, Las Cruces, New Mexico, some parts of Albuquerque, select smaller cities in Texas away from Austin and Dallas like Waco, Wichita Falls, or even San Antonio's more affordable areas. These offer dramatically lower cost of living than their coastal counterparts, warm and dry climates that many retirees love, and reasonable health care access in the larger cities. The trade-offs include summer heat that can be extreme, sometimes dangerously so for older residents, water concerns in some locations over the long term, distance from family for those whose families live elsewhere, and cultural fit issues for some. The third category is affordable Midwest, places like Des Moines, Iowa, Omaha, Nebraska, parts of Indianapolis and Columbus, smaller cities in Michigan and Wisconsin outside the major metros. The Midwest is consistently underrated in American retirement discussions, but the financial case is often excellent. Very low cost of living, good healthcare infrastructure in the mid-sized cities, generally friendly communities, 4 distinct seasons which some retirees prefer, and surprisingly active cultural scenes in many of the larger cities. The main trade-off is winter. Midwest winters are real, and they can be especially hard on older residents. Ice, snow, cold, and limited daylight for 3 or 4 months a year can be genuinely tough. Some retirees solve this with the seasonal split I mentioned earlier, spending summers in the Midwest and winters somewhere warmer. The fourth category is the Appalachian Corridor, places like eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, parts of West Virginia, outside the expensive Northern Virginia region, and rural Pennsylvania. Some of the most beautiful scenery in America. Very low cost of living in many areas. A certain kind of quiet, community-focused life that some retirees find deeply satisfying. The trade-offs are often limited healthcare access, especially in the truly rural parts. Distance from airports for family visits. And some economic depression in certain regions that affects quality of life, even for those who are financially comfortable. The fifth category is international retirement. This is under-discussed in American financial content, but it's worth mentioning honestly. Some retirees find that certain countries offer dramatically better quality of life per dollar. Parts of Mexico, especially expat communities in San Miguel de Allende, Merida, or Lake Chapala. Parts of Portugal, especially the Algarve region. Parts of Costa Rica, Panama, and Ecuador. some areas of Malaysia and Thailand. These destinations can offer retirement lifestyles that would require 3 or 4 times the income to replicate in the United States. The trade-offs are real and shouldn't be minimized. Healthcare varies by country and needs to be evaluated carefully. Distance from family becomes much more significant. Legal and tax complexity increases. Cultural adjustment can be difficult, especially for people who haven't lived abroad before. And political and economic instability in some locations adds risk that didn't exist in the United States. But for certain retirees, especially those without strong family ties requiring them to stay close, international retirement can be transformative. I want to name something important. None of these categories is automatically right or wrong. The right location for you depends on your specific situation, your family configuration, your health, your temperament, your financial position, your cultural preferences, your hobbies and interests, your tolerance for change. What works beautifully for one retired couple would be miserable for another. The critical thing is not finding some universally optimal location. It's making your choice deliberately after actually examining the options rather than defaulting to wherever you happen to be when you retire. The deliberate choice, whatever it turns out to be, almost always produces better outcomes than the default one. If you fix this, everything changes. You don't need more money, you need a better plan. And the plan for retirement geography requires actually running the comparison across multiple options rather than treating your current location as the only possibility. Your options are almost always larger than you think they are. Let me now walk you through the practical process of actually making this decision well. Because most Americans who do relocate for retirement do it badly. They rush the decision, pick wrong, and sometimes end up moving back within 3 to 5 years. That round-trip relocation costs them both money and emotional energy, and it could have been avoided with a better process. Here's the approach I recommend, and it starts much earlier than people expect. Step 1, which ideally happens at least 5 years before retirement, is building your candidate list. This isn't about committing to anything. It's about broadening the options you're aware of. Spend a Saturday morning running comparisons. Use the cost of living tools I mentioned earlier. Look at state tax treatment. Read retirement community rankings from publications like Kiplinger, AARP, U.S. News. Pay attention to places that keep showing up in multiple rankings. Those aren't random coincidences. They're indicators that those places have real structural advantages. By the end of this process, you should have a list of 5 to 10 potential destinations that, on paper, could work for you. Step 2 is visiting seriously. This means going to your top 3 or 4 candidate locations for at least a week each. Not as a tourist, as a potential resident. Stay in an Airbnb or a vacation rental rather than a hotel. Shop at the grocery store. Walk the neighborhoods in the evening. Go to a local restaurant on a Tuesday, not a Saturday. Attend a religious service if that's relevant to you. Visit the local hospital. Talk to real estate agents not to buy anything, but to learn. The goal is to simulate what ordinary life would feel like in this location, not what a vacation there feels like. Most relocation failures happen because people fell in love with the vacation version of a place and didn't understand what living there year-round would actually be like. The place that feels magical during a 1-week winter escape from Minneapolis can feel hot, isolated, or culturally unfamiliar when you try to live there permanently. Step 3, if possible, is what I'll call a test residency. This means renting in your top candidate location for 3 to 6 months before committing to a move. Many retirees do this by renting a furnished apartment or condo during the season they're most uncertain about. If you're considering moving south, rent in that location during August when the heat is most intense. If you're considering moving north, rent during January. Don't test the location during its best months and assume the worst months will also be manageable. Test during the worst months. Step 4 is consulting people who've done what you're considering. Online communities, local meetup groups, Facebook groups for retirees in specific locations. These can be genuinely useful for getting honest perspectives. Talk specifically to people who moved from a similar starting point to yours. Ask them what they were surprised by. Ask them what they miss. Ask them what they do differently. Most retirees who've made relocation decisions are generous with this information because they went through the same uncertainty and want to help others. Step 5 is actually making the decision and executing it well. Don't sell your current home before you have a clear alternative. Don't buy in the new location before you've rented there at least briefly. Don't commit to anything that's difficult to reverse until you're confident. Relocation is a major life decision, and it deserves deliberate pacing, not impulsive enthusiasm. Let me address the emotional dimension honestly. Relocation in your 60s is genuinely hard. Your house likely holds 30 years of memories. Your neighborhood has your routines and your familiar places. Your friends are there. Your church or community is there. Leaving all of that requires real emotional courage. And the grief of leaving is real even when the logical case for leaving is strong. I want to name that grief directly because pretending it doesn't exist makes the decision harder, not easier. If you decide to relocate, you're giving something up, something meaningful, the memories that home contains, the familiarity that your current life provides, the relationships embedded in your current location, the sense of belonging that comes from having lived somewhere for decades. None of that is trivial, and respecting it is part of making the decision well. But here's the balance. Staying also gives something up, in a different way. It gives up decades of additional financial comfort. It gives up experiences your savings could have funded in a lower-cost location. It gives up the new relationships, new discoveries, new chapters of life that a different environment might have created. The choice isn't really between keeping everything and giving something up. It's between two different versions of giving something up and being honest about what each version costs. For some retirees, staying is worth it, all things considered. They've weighed both versions and decided that the familiarity and embedded relationships matter more than the financial optimization. That's a defensible choice when it's made consciously. What's harder to defend is staying by pure inertia without ever examining the alternative, simply because examining it felt like disloyalty to the life you've built. If you fix this, everything changes. You don't need more money. You need a better plan. And the plan, for this specific decision, requires giving yourself permission to consider alternatives without feeling guilty about it. Considering isn't committing. You can examine options seriously, decide to stay, and make that decision with full awareness of what it costs, which is a much better position than never looking at all. Before I close this out with the final piece that ties everything together, I want to pause for a moment. If you've made it this far into the video with me, if you've sat through honest analysis of a decision most Americans never examine consciously, if you're still here and still willing to think seriously about whether your current location actually serves the next chapter of your life, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and walk with us every single day. This is the kind of conversation we have here. Not the version that lets you avoid examining anything uncomfortable. The version that respects you enough to surface the decisions you'd benefit from making deliberately rather than by inertia. And I want to say something directly. The geography of retirement decision is almost never included in the mainstream financial advice most Americans receive. Financial advisors typically don't discuss it because they don't have expertise in comparing locations and because a decision to relocate doesn't generate any fees for them. Retirement planning software doesn't address it because it can't quantify the intangible factors that matter. The entire conversation about where you spend your retirement years tends to happen in isolation, usually within one family, often without any outside perspective at all. This is a failure of the financial advice ecosystem. A decision this consequential deserves more attention than it typically gets, and the fact that it usually gets zero attention means most Americans make this choice by default, without ever looking at it clearly. I'd rather you at least look. Then decide whatever you decide, with full awareness. Now, let me give you the final piece. The most important thing I can tell you about the geography of retirement is this. It's not a one-time decision. It's a decision that can be revisited at different stages of retirement for different reasons as your life evolves. Let me explain what I mean. Retirement is often imagined as a single chapter, with one location chosen at the start and maintained until the end. But in reality, retirement typically spans 25 to 35 years, and different phases of that span have different optimal answers. The early retirement phase, ages 60 to 75 or so, is the most active. Retirees in this phase are typically healthy, energetic, and interested in exploration. This is the phase where relocation makes the most sense for many people, because you have the physical energy to make the move and the time to build a new life in a new location. It's also the phase where cost of living differences matter most, because expenses are often highest due to active lifestyle, travel, hobbies, activities. The middle retirement phase, ages 75 to 85, is often characterized by some decline in energy but continued independence. This is often the phase where access to quality health care becomes more important. Some retirees who move to beautiful rural locations in their early 60s find themselves wanting to move again in their late 70s, closer to better medical infrastructure. This second move is common enough that it's worth planning for, rather than being surprised by. The late retirement phase, ages 85 and beyond, often involves increasing dependence on others, adult children, caregivers, medical professionals. The location that made perfect sense at 65 might not make sense at 88. Some retirees move closer to adult children in this phase, specifically to facilitate support. Others move into retirement communities or assisted living. Still others downsize dramatically as their activity level declines. Knowing that retirement has these phases changes how you think about any single geographic decision. You don't have to pick one location for the entire 35 years. You can pick one that serves your 60s well, understanding that you might make another move in your late 70s or early 80s if circumstances warrant it. This multi-phase thinking removes some of the pressure from the initial decision. You're not committing forever. You're choosing the first chapter with the freedom to write subsequent chapters differently. This framing also allows for more strategic decisions. A couple in their early 60s might deliberately choose a vibrant, lower-cost location away from family, knowing they plan to move closer to family around age 75. The early years in the lower-cost location preserve their savings while they're most capable of enjoying an active lifestyle. The later move closer to family happens when they need more support anyway. Both phases make sense for their specific reasons. If you fix this, everything changes. You don't need more money. You need a better plan. And the plan for the geography of retirement requires thinking across multiple phases rather than trying to make a single perfect decision that works for every circumstance across 35 years. Flexibility is part of the plan. Evolution is part of the plan, and so is the willingness to make a second major decision a decade or two after the first, if circumstances warrant it. Now, one more thing before the close. I want to say something to those of you who feel your financial situation is already tight, who aren't sure your savings will last, who wonder if it's too late to improve your retirement outlook. The geography decision is one of the few major levers you can still pull even late in the process. If you're already 68 and starting to worry about whether your money will last, relocating to a dramatically lower cost area can extend your retirement by 5, 8, even 10 years. It's not a guaranteed fix, but it's a genuine one. And it's available even when most of the other financial levers are no longer in play. Don't rule out this option just because you didn't consider it earlier. There's a scene I want you to carry with you after this video ends. Imagine a Tuesday morning, 10 or 12 years from now. You're in your 70s. You're sitting on a porch somewhere with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light move across whatever landscape is in front of you. And here's where the story splits into two versions. In the first version, you're sitting on the porch of a home you chose deliberately, in a location you selected after examining your options carefully, at a cost that allows your savings to last the rest of your life with room to spare. The mortgage is long paid off, or there is no mortgage because this home was affordable. The property taxes are manageable. The cost of everything around you, groceries, utilities, occasional dining, medical care, fits comfortably within your retirement income. You're not watching your bank balance anxiously. You're watching the morning. Your adult children visit, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, depending on the geography you negotiated. But the relationships are intact because you put thought into how to preserve them. You have friends here, local ones, made over years of being present. You have a community. The life you built here has texture, depth, meaning. And most mornings, you feel a quiet gratitude that you made the choice you made. In the second version, you're sitting on the porch of the home you've owned for 40 years, in the neighborhood you've lived in since you were 35, in a city where you spent your entire working life. The home is paid off, but everything else costs more than you wish it did. Property taxes keep creeping up. Maintenance on the old house costs thousands every year. Everything around you is expensive, and your retirement savings are declining faster than your original plan anticipated. You're watching the porch, but you're also watching the balance. You love where you are. You've loved it for decades. But the financial pressure is starting to constrict the life you can actually live within it. The trips you plan to take, you've scaled back. The help you plan to offer your grandchildren, you've limited. The dreams you had for this chapter are getting smaller, quietly, because the location you're living in is costing more than you budgeted for. And sometimes, late at night, you find yourself wondering if you should have looked more carefully at alternatives when you were younger and had more flexibility. Both of these scenes are happening right now in American homes across the country. And the difference between them is not intelligence, discipline, or financial preparation. It's one major decision, made deliberately versus made by default. A decision worth, in many cases, $300,000. A decision worth decades of the quality of life you actually get to experience. I want to name something important about this decision. Unlike most financial decisions, this one is almost entirely within your control. You can't control the stock market, you can't control inflation, you can't control healthcare costs or tax policy changes. You can control almost completely where you live. It's one of the few major retirement variables that you fully own, which makes it strange that so few Americans treat it as an active decision rather than a default one. You still have time. If you're in your 40s or 50s watching this, you have 15 to 25 years to examine options, visit places, even do trial residencies before you commit. If you're in your late 50s or early 60s, you still have the physical and mental capacity to research thoroughly and relocate if it makes sense. Even if you're already in retirement and wishing you'd thought about this earlier, you can still make a change. The window for this decision stays open much longer than most people realize. What closes the window is not time. It's the belief that you don't have options. The work ahead of you, if you want to do it, is straightforward. Spend one Saturday running cost of living comparisons across several candidate locations. Spend one weekend visiting a place that's been on your mind. Have one honest conversation with your spouse about whether your current location is the optimal place for your next 30 years, or just the default one. Have one conversation with your adult children about what geography would actually work for all of you. None of this is heroic work. It's just work that most people don't do, which is exactly why doing it produces different outcomes than the default ones. Now, before you go, let me ask you for 3 things. First, if anything in this video made you think about your own situation differently, subscribe to this channel. Walk with us. We're close to completing the first full chapter of this series on the financial and life architecture of the second half of American adulthood. The next videos are going to dig into the remaining pieces that most Americans over 40 never consciously examine, but quietly shape the rest of their lives. You don't want to miss what's coming. Second, share this video with 5 people, 5 friends, 5 family members, 5 people in their 40s, 50s, or 60s who've never seriously considered whether their current location is the best place for the next chapter of their lives. You might be the reason one of them, years from now, is sitting on the first porch rather than the second. And third, leave me a comment. Tell me where you live now. Tell me where you've considered. Tell me what's held you back from examining it more seriously. Every deep video we make starts with someone asking the right question. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people counting on you. And remember, your savings don't have one value. They have different values in different places. Choose where you spend them as deliberately as you chose how you earned them. Because that one choice, more than almost any other, determines the life those dollars actually buy you.